Time for chapter 13 of our HACCP class. This is all about organizing and managing HACCP programs. So our objectives for this section are to describe the commitment from upper management that's necessary for food safety to succeed, describe the steps for developing and implementing HACCP in the production plant. We're going to talk about the time and the commitment that it takes to be successful, which includes making time for training. Without training, your program just isn't going to take off. It's not going to be successful. And then we're also going to look at when change affects our HACCP system and what we have to do to navigate that. So for HACCP to be effective, it needs to be embraced by everyone. That's a big part of that food safety culture. You need management on board from the top down because they're providing resources, they're providing time to do things. And without that, employees aren't going to be able to actually work through that HACCP system and have it work every single day to support your food safety. It also needs to be organized appropriately so that we're efficient and effective. We're not overspending money or allocating resources in the wrong direction. And outside of that, we also need our prerequisite programs to be running very well. So your CGMPs, which we discussed earlier, and your prerequisite programs are that foundation for your HACCP plan, if you remember. So if you're building a house and your foundation isn't correct, that house isn't going to be stable. In the same way, when you are trying to run your HACCP program, if things aren't clean, if you have bugs in your place, if people are failing to wear PPE, or there's a large likelihood for things to get into your product like glass, those are things that are inherently problematic for the functionality of your HACCP plan. So in order to avoid problems, we're going to communicate really well. And a lot of that comes from management, your policies that they state from the company overall. What's our culture going to be like? How are we going to help people get what they need? And so it's a lot about what they're willing to do in terms of money, giving you time to do the things you need to do, enough people to actually make it all happen. Especially equipment, right? We need all kinds of different equipment and the right equipment to do the right job, and then training to make sure that all of this happens the way we intended. So if we don't understand the importance of food safety, if we don't understand the whys of what we're doing, then our HACCP system just isn't likely to work. Outside of that, if we're able to look at our own systems in an unbiased manner and evaluate them, you're more likely to avoid problems. So we need to make time to look at our system, update it, see if any changes need to be made. And a lot of times we do that by doing an audit, a self-audit, or reviewing second or third party audits. Now, as far as cost goes, of course, training time costs money because you're paying your employees. Often when you're bringing on a trainer, it costs a lot of money to bring someone in to do that training. Now, lucky for you all, the cost to you is minimal through the community college, but generally speaking, people will pay thousands of dollars for their training. Then developing the HACCP plan, that takes a good amount of time and it takes a good number of people to do it. So again, there's another investment there. And then outside of that, once you're enacting and building on that HACCP plan and all the components that go along with it, you're going to be looking at doing studies, doing monitoring activities, recording. All of those things take time. And outside of that, your efficiency may go down somewhat because you're trying to include these safety protocols, and maybe you're going above and beyond and doing those quality protocols too. And all of those require a commitment and a cost. So we get a lot of benefits from that though. If we have a better food safety culture, we're less likely to have recalls or other food safety issues, which means we are going to have a wider customer base, a better reputation. We are continuously improving our system. So eventually we get better and better, and that really helps us be sustainable as a company. In addition to this, your record keeping is built in now. You need to keep those records and review those records regularly. That helps you watch your system grow, see if any problems are developing or if you're doing anything well. And that way you can adjust as you need to before, say, anything becomes a problem, or you can keep improving upon your efficiency. It also is legal evidence that you're doing what you're saying you're doing. So in the event that you do have a recall and maybe it was somebody else's fault, like your supplier or your buyer, then it helps protect you in some senses. If you're able to show that you were doing the right things at the right time. It also helps us be more efficient at handling things like deviations. So if you plan ahead for a problem, when that problem occurs, then you know what you're going to do, and it makes that response quicker and it makes more sense. So it makes us more efficient in lots of different ways. Now, your HACCP coordinator, this person is responsible for managing, organizing, and creating your HACCP plan. They're going to be the head of your team. And then when it comes to everyday work, they're going to be the person on the floor that people can go to ask questions, to watch the system and see that it's working as intended. This person needs to have a scientific background. They need to have technical skills. So they need to understand how the machinery works, how the people work. And then outside of that, of course, they're going to need other people for resources, for information. And so they're also in charge of finding experts in their field, people who they might need to access for information regarding critical limits, people to access for training. There are a lot of consultants out there that your HACCP coordinator might be looking to get some help. Now your HACCP team is usually going to include someone from every single department. So we'll see some from operations, people from engineering, maintenance, sanitation, QA, QC, management, outside assistance. This list is definitely not comprehensive. You would probably have somebody from purchasing, someone from packaging. There are lots of different people that we want to look at what we're doing. One, so we have buy-in, because those people are going to take that plan that you developed back to their department and inform the other people about it and why they're doing what they're doing. But also so we don't miss anything when we are creating our HACCP plan in the first place. And it also helps make us aware when something might not be functioning as well in a specific department, because that person will know where to go to make the necessary changes. Generally speaking, your HACCP team is in charge of developing and maintaining the HACCP plan, maintaining your system. The other thing they are in charge of is developing standard operating procedures to make the implementation of the HACCP plan easier. So all of those documents that go along with the everyday work that tell us what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the training that goes along with it. That's a part of your HACCP team duties. Now, when it comes to developing your HACCP plan, it's a good idea to break it down into specific parts that are associated with individuals' responsibilities, being able to delegate small tasks to different parts of operations. Then you also need to take an open and honest look at what's going on already in your system. What kind of prerequisite programs do we have? Are they working? Do they need improvement? Is our food safety culture on the up and up? Do we feel good about the fact that we're making safe product consistently already? Or is that something that we need to work on? So this gives us a basis of where to start. Sometimes we need to practice before we actually do the thing, right? So making a mock HACCP plan is a really good idea just to get you rolling. And then outside of that, this document's going to be, in some sense, a living document, because it's going to change over time when you have maybe new products or new machinery. These things will require you to reevaluate your HACCP plan again. And so you'll need teams to deal with that as well. When you're implementing your HACCP plan, training, retraining, it's always a good idea. People need to have food safety training on an annual basis anyway, by regulation. People need to understand their jobs before they're doing them, before they're actually on the line. And then, of course, they need to be updated on any changes, and maybe to be retrained if something's not going as intended. And so when you're looking at your actual training processes, you also need to make sure that that training is effective. So we need to be open and honest about how we're doing with that side of things. When you first get started, just like any other system, you can expect some issues from the start. We're not perfect. We often mess up when we try things the first time. And so there's gonna be a trial period. And you're gonna figure out those problems and you're gonna work through them and you're gonna make your system better. And you'll also probably have an initial validation where you're looking at, say, a new piece of equipment and doing studies. Can it actually meet our expectations and do the processes as they need to be performed? And then watch the system as it's growing and evaluate, look at your progress, see what we're doing, see how quickly we're improving. Maybe we need to change how we're reviewing. So it's always a work in progress because it's continuous improvement. When it comes to training, you need to think about the user. Who's the person learning? How do they learn? What works best for them? Employing different modes of learning will really help enhance your training programs. So having things like written materials, images, videos, understanding what language to use and how to relate things to people's job. That's how you really get into helping people understand what you're trying to tell them. And it also helps if people like you, to be honest. So if you can make some jokes or find a way to make them feel like they relate to you, that will accentuate the value of that learning. When it comes to specific tasks at work, it's really important for people to understand on their own without being watched or babysitted what those tasks are, what's important about it, why they're doing it. Do not forget to tell them why. A lot of times as adults, if you don't tell us why we're doing something, we won't actually do it. Make sure you give them enough time. This is one that we run into all the time. People get focused right on the bottom line, that dollar amount, that production schedule that needs to happen. But training is also required. And so you need to give people time to learn, time to do their training, time to understand their job and the materials that go along with that. Now, once the training actually happens, then you will review that employee's performance, and that's how you verify whether or not that training actually is functioning. Now, HACCP training is required at all levels, and at least one individual in your plant has to have successfully completed a course that comes from the FDA or FISIS. And you need at least one overview of HACCP for all employees. And then for each individual job or particular task, there needs to be training for that. So we need lots of different trainings at all different levels. Now, when it comes to resources, we talked about this earlier. Are there proper tools and equipment available, right? Do we have the cleaning materials that we need? Is our equipment functioning? Is it up to date? Are we maintaining it well? Do we have enough people to do what we need? That's something we're struggling with a lot right now. Our workforce is fluctuating consistently, and so we need to make sure that we still have enough people to meet our needs. And then lastly, our systems. Can we actually monitor those critical control points that we need to monitor? And are we storing our data? Are we reviewing it and using it to our advantage? So when you're managing your HACCP program, you need full support from your management. Responsibilities need to be clearly defined. This job title is responsible for this. And then we need to communicate well with our employees, with our coworkers, with our managers, all across the board. We need to be talking about what's important, what we need to be doing, and why. So how do we evaluate change? How do changes happen in the first place? Maybe you are expanding, which is exciting, and you're going to get a new line, but you need to knock out an entire wall in your building to make that happen. Well, if I'm knocking out an entire wall, I need to think about what the implications are of that construction. Am I going to need to stop production or schedule around it? What if I find some mold that was in that wall that I knocked down? So there are lots of different things that we need to consider when we go through a change, like are new hazards being introduced? Is a new ingredient I'm bringing in going to affect my product line? This is especially important if I am bringing in an allergen to my system that I didn't have in there before. Whenever you have a change within your system, your ingredients, your product, your equipment, your process, you need to review that HACCP plan. You also need to decide who's allowed to make changes to your HACCP plan and how they're supposed to do it. And so anytime you have a new product that you're developing, you need to make sure that you develop that HACCP plan before that product's being made. So that way we are accounting for all the potential issues before we're actually in production. Now, sometimes hazards evolve in the world and we need to keep up to date on that. So maybe there's something out there like the swine flu. Maybe there's a whole bunch of outbreaks of listeria in a particular kind of product. And that product is the same product as your product. You need to be watching out for that because that means that there's a good chance that you might need to take stronger steps to prevent that issue. So that means reassessing your HACCP plan. For day-to-day management, you want to review your records. If you can look at them every single day, it's going to help you so much with your functionality and your management. It's a good idea for management to receive daily reports related to food safety. How many deviations did I have? How did things run today? Was everything signed off on? How good are we doing at doing that paperwork in the first place? The biggest thing about reviewing your documents and analyzing that data is that we can identify trends. And identifying trends allows us to make adjustments before the big bad thing happens, before you have a recall or before you have a deviation. So the more on top of it we are, the better off we are. Now, outside of making changes to our HACCP plan when something new occurs or we put in a new product or some new equipment, we need to evaluate our HACCP plan anyway periodically. And we can do that with audits. Using audits, it's a great way for us to actually look at our system in an unbiased way and see how it's functioning and have a written review of how everything's working together, see what we need to change if we need to. Your HACCP team is in charge of doing that interpretation of the audit, looking at those findings and see how can we do better. So you have a group activity, documentation, do's and don'ts. You're going to answer each question with a yes or a no. Now for our last chapter 14, that's enforcement of HACCP. So we're going to explain the inspection structure of FICIS. We're going to look at the structure and functioning of the FDA's HACCP enforcement. We're going to look at the responsibilities of the plant and how that relates to regulatory enforcement action. We're going to explain the difference in regulatory structure for dairy products as compared to juice and seafood, and then how does that work with FSIS.